Hi friends, Jan from the Moline Library here. Today we are going to be making the wax paper leaf luminaries that are the craft for November. In addition to the things that come in your kit, you'll also need to go outside and find some leaves. You'll need a pair of scissors, some glue, an iron, and a cloth, as well as something to cover your workstation. So we're going to get started first by making the frames. And to do this, you'll take 4 popsicle sticks, and you'll lay them out into kind of a square. And we are going to glue them so that you've got the ones that are at the top and the bottom of the frame are underneath the ones that are on the side. You could do it opposite. At this point, it really doesn't matter, as long as you don't have them crossing each other. So I've just put a corner of glue there, and I'm going to get them lined up, and I'm going to try to get them nice and even because we're going to be making 4 of these. We want them to kind of match. Make sure that they're not tilted or anything like that. Nice 90-degree angles. All right, so I'm not going to pick this up, but hopefully you can see I've got a little square there. And then we are going to make 3 more of those for a total of 4 frames. All right, so now I have my 4 frames done, and you can see they kind of look like that. And they're still kind of drying, so I'm going to leave them alone. And we're going to move next onto the base. And so to start the base, we're going to start it kind of like we did with the frames, with just the 4 craft sticks. But instead of just putting a little dab of glue in the corners, I'm going to go all the way across that top and bottom craft stick with the glue. If you are using hot glue for this project, when you're making the frames, I would suggest that you work kind of quickly because you don't want that glue to dry and get it in the wrong shape. And when you're doing this step, if you are using hot glue, I wouldn't put the glue all the way around. I would glue them down individually. So starting by making the outline, which looks just like the frame. All right, so I've got those on. Then I'm going to take one more and put it directly down the middle to try to make sure that that's evenly spaced. All right. Make sure that stays in a nice square. And then I'm going to add 2 more on each side of that middle. Again, trying to make sure that they're fairly evenly spaced. So that's done. I've got, 2 on the bottom, and then it'll be a total of 7 on top. And then I am going to glue another craft stick along the top and bottom to just kind of give that a little extra stability. I want to make sure that that lines up with the one that was on the bottom. You should have a few craft sticks left over, just in case one breaks or something goes wrong and you need to start over. All right, I'm just kind of making sure everything's lined up. And then we're going to let this dry also and move on to the next step. All right, well, you can see I've got my 4 frames that are up there drying, as well as my base. And the next thing I'm going to do is take a cloth of some sort and put it down over my workspace, and then put down my wax paper. I would recommend doing it this way because once you get everything set in the next steps, if you try to put the cloth underneath the wax paper at that time, it can kind of make things slide around a little bit, and then you've got to do a lot of readjustment. So what I'm going to do is just start placing my leaves in here. See how I like them. right, and then I'm going to take my frames, which by now should be dry, and I'm going to lay them out to make sure that I have this properly spaced. And when we're doing this, we want to make sure that we have the stick that is on the bottom, closest to the wax paper is the top and the bottom, and the ones that are closer to you are on the sides. All right. So that looks pretty good. And I'm going to go ahead and take those frames back off, hopefully not moving my leaves. All right, and then once the frames are done, we're going to carefully fold this back over and make sure those leaves don't move when we do that. We want to have an iron that is set to about a medium heat. So now that my iron has gotten hot, I'm going to press it onto the wax paper. You don't really want to go back and forth like you would if you were doing clothes, because that can move the leaves around. So we're just going to kind of move it from place to place. And what this is doing, it's melting the wax that is part of the wax paper and sealing it to itself. Okay. So now that I've got that fairly well melted, then I can use a little bit of motion to make sure that everything is nice and sealed. But for the first go around, you want to just set it on there and make sure it gets all nice and melted and set into place. Okay. And then don't forget to turn your iron off. So next we're going to take our frames and put them back into place. Oops, that one's not quite dry. Make sure, hopefully everything is still lined up correctly. If you don't want to go out and gather leaves, you could always cut some leaves out of paper, or if you don't even really like leaves that much, you could cut something else out of paper. I saw one example where someone used crayon shavings and put it in there, and then when she used the iron, they all melted, and it was pretty cool. So once we've got everything set up, then making sure that the top and the bottom are the craft sticks that are closest to the wax paper, we're just going to glue these on. I'm putting a line of glue on the part that's facing the wax paper and gluing that down. And you want to leave just a tiny little space maybe. They don't have to be right up against each other, but you don't want to leave too much of a space either, because where they come together is where your corners of your luminary are going to be. You also want to make sure that these are in a pretty good straight line, the top and bottom. So that looks pretty even. And we're going to let that dry for a minute. And then we're going to cut off the excess wax paper along the top and bottom and one of the sides, but leave just a bit, about maybe a centimeter or so, about the width of your fingernail. Leave that on one side. Now that we've got that all glued and everything and dried up, we're going to bring it together and put it on the frame to make sure everything fits nicely. And then we're going to put a generous amount of glue here along the wax paper. And then take that craft stick next to it and kind of fold it in, hold it in place for a little bit to make sure that dries. This can be a little bit tricky. You could also, if you didn't leave that wax paper, you can just glue the popsicle sticks to each other, but I think that having a little bit of that waxed paper gives it a little stability. Okay. So then the next thing that we're going to do to make sure that this is nice and secure, so we're going to, it's kind of hard to see in there, we're going to take some glue and just put a generous dab in the corner. Just kind of letting it form its own bond there. And we're going to do that with each of the corners. That's just going to help secure the frame to the base. And even if they didn't line up completely totally, that should be okay. And then we're just going to let that dry. And when it's all done, we're going to turn on the tea light and set it inside. And you've got yourself a little luminary. I hope you enjoyed this craft and look forward to next month's craft in December. Bye-bye.